When one of comedy's biggest legends walks into what should have been a light-hearted morning show interview, no one expects it to turn into a battleground. Yet that's exactly what happened when Eddie Murphy appeared on The View. What began as a routine press stop soon spiraled into one of the most talked-about TV confrontations of the year, a clash between humor and hostility. Between charm and confrontation, Eddie had been doing the usual publicity rounds for his latest project. He stepped onto The View set with his trademark grin, confident, relaxed, and polite. The studio audience erupted with applause, thrilled to see a legend of his stature live on air. The panel, led by Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, and Joy Behar, seemed equally excited. "Eddie, it's so great to have you here," Whoopi said warmly as he took his seat. "We've been looking forward to this all week." "Thanks for having me," Eddie replied with his easy charm. "It's always a pleasure." At first, everything went exactly as planned. Eddie spoke animatedly about his new film, sharing stories from the set and cracking jokes that had both the hosts and audience laughing. His charisma filled the room, the kind of effortless presence that comes from decades of experience. He talked about staying passionate after 40 years in the industry, about the magic of storytelling and the joy of making people laugh. "You know," he said, eyes bright, "after all these years I still get excited about new projects. There's something special about bringing characters to life, about making people laugh or feel something they didn't expect." Sarah nodded in admiration. "That passion really comes through in your work. You've stayed relevant across so many generations." "Comedy's universal," Eddie replied. "People need to laugh, especially nowadays. If I can give them a little escape, a moment of joy, then I'm doing my job." For a few minutes, it felt like vintage television magic, a relaxed, respectful conversation with one of the world's most beloved entertainers. But then, almost imperceptibly, the mood shifted. Joy Behar, who had been unusually quiet until that point, leaned forward. Her tone changed, her eyes narrowing slightly as she interrupted. "Speaking of comedy, Eddie," she said, "don't you think some of your earlier material might be considered problematic by today's standards?" The room's energy dropped instantly. Laughter faded. Even Whoopi seemed to sense where this was heading. Eddie's smile faltered just enough to reveal surprise. "I'm sorry," he said evenly. "What do you mean exactly?" Joy pressed on. "Well," she continued, "there are jokes in your old stand-up routines that some people might find offensive now. Don't you think you owe your fans an apology for that kind of content?" The air grew tense. The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances. Whoopi quickly tried to diffuse things. "Maybe we should focus on Eddie's current work," she suggested lightly. But Joy wasn't done. If anything, Whoopi's attempt to steer things back seemed to make her double down. "No," she insisted. "I think this is important to address. We're living in a time of accountability. Shouldn't public figures take responsibility for their past mistakes?" Eddie straightened in his chair, his relaxed demeanor replaced with a quiet firmness. "Mistakes?" he repeated, locking eyes with her. "Hold on a minute, Joy. Let's be clear about something." The audience shifted uncomfortably, sensing the storm that was coming. Eddie continued, his voice steady but edged with conviction. "Comedy reflects its time. What I said on stage 40 years ago was part of that moment, part of who we all were back then. You can't judge the past with today's rules and pretend that's fairness." Joy tried to interject, but Eddie raised his hand slightly, commanding the floor without aggression. "I've grown. Everyone grows. But if you erase where comedy came from, the risks, the boundaries we pushed, you erase the whole history of what made it matter. We didn't tell those jokes to hurt people. We told them to make people laugh, to make them think. That's what comedians do." His words landed heavy, his tone calm yet powerful. Even Whoopi leaned back, visibly impressed by his composure. Joy forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So no regrets?" she asked. Eddie chuckled softly. "No regrets," he said. "Because everything I did got me here, sitting across from you, still working, still making people laugh. If that's not growth, I don't know what is." For a moment there was silence, the kind that follows truth spoken plainly. Then the audience erupted in applause. Eddie leaned back, relaxed again, the faintest smile on his face. The tension lingered, but the balance of power had clearly shifted. Eddie Murphy hadn't just defended himself. He'd reminded everyone why he remains one of comedy's greatest. What was supposed to be a routine morning interview ended up as a lesson in poise, authenticity, and the art of standing tall when others try to bring you down. Eddie Murphy leaned forward slightly, his expression calm but firm. "I've been doing comedy for over 40 years, he began. And I've always pushed boundaries. That's what comedians do." Joy Behar didn't miss a beat. "At whose expense, though?" she shot back, her voice rising just enough to cut through the air. "Some of those boundaries you pushed hurt people." Eddie's tone remained composed, though there was a quiet steel in his voice now. "Comedy has always been about examining society, its flaws, its contradictions, and yes, sometimes its discomforts. If we start censoring art retroactively based on whatever standards come later, where does that end?" Joy leaned back in her chair with a smirk that could only be described as self-satisfied. She believed she had him cornered. "So you're saying you have no regrets about any of your past material?" "I'm saying," Eddie replied, his voice firm and unwavering, "that I'm proud of my body of work. I've grown as a person and as a performer over the decades, like everyone else. But I'm not going to sit here and apologize for making people laugh or for being part of comedy history." The tension in the studio was unmistakable. Audience members shifted in their seats. Even the other co-hosts looked uncomfortable. Sarah Haynes glanced toward Whoopi Goldberg, silently pleading for her to step in. Joy's smile thinned. "That's a very convenient way to avoid accountability." Eddie's jaw tightened. "Convenient?" he echoed. "You think it's convenient to come on a show expecting a friendly conversation about my work, only to be ambushed with accusations? You think it's convenient to have my entire career reduced to a few talking points you came up with before I even sat down?" "I'm just asking the questions that need to be asked," Joy replied defensively, though her tone betrayed a flicker of satisfaction, as if she were enjoying the chaos she'd created. Eddie's voice rose, his patience slipping. "No, you're not asking questions, Joy. You're making accusations. You're demanding apologies for jokes written in a different time, jokes that reflected the world we lived in then. Tell me, do you apply this same standard to every comedian who's ever pushed boundaries, or just the one sitting across from you right now?" The silence that followed was thick. Sarah opened her mouth to interject, hoping to cool things down, but Eddie wasn't finished. He turned squarely toward Joy, his tone sharpening. "Let me ask you something. Have you ever said anything in your career that someone might find offensive? Have you ever told a joke that didn't age well?" Joy's face flushed, her confidence faltering for the first time. She blinked rapidly, clearly not expecting to be challenged so directly. "Because," Eddie continued, "if we're going to play this game of retroactive judgment, it should apply to everyone. Don't you agree?" "That's completely different," Joy stammered, fumbling for ground. "I've never done the kind of material that you have." "Really?" Eddie asked, raising an eyebrow. His tone was almost playful now, but the undercurrent was unmistakably sharp. "You've never joked about someone's looks, their background, their beliefs? You've never said something that made someone uncomfortable?" Whoopi Goldberg tried to intervene again, sensing the discussion was spiraling beyond anyone's control. "Maybe we should all take a breath here," she said diplomatically. "We're on the same team," but Eddie shook his head slightly. "No, Whoopi, I think this is exactly the kind of conversation that needs to happen. Because what's happening right now, this moment, is a perfect example of the double standards that are destroying honest dialogue in this country." "Double standards?" Joy scoffed, trying to regain her footing. "Come on, Eddie, I think you're being a little dramatic." "Dramatic?" Eddie let out a short laugh, one without humor. "Joy, you ambushed me on live television, demanding that I apologize for my entire career, and now you're accusing me of being dramatic for pointing out the hypocrisy?" The studio fell silent. No one moved. Even the audience, usually lively during moments of tension, sat frozen. This wasn't the playful banter or controlled chaos daytime TV was known for. This was something raw, a collision of egos and worldviews happening in real time. Eddie leaned forward again, his voice lowering but every word hitting with precision. "Here's the thing, Joy. Comedy is supposed to make people think. Sometimes it makes them uncomfortable. But if we strip comedy of its edge, if we punish people for the past instead of learning from it, then we're not evolving. We're erasing history. And if we start erasing every artist who said something that doesn't fit today's script, eventually, there'll be no one left standing. For a moment, Joy didn't respond. The smirk was gone. All that remained was silence, the kind that follows when the truth has landed harder than anyone expected. Eddie sat back, composed once more. "I'm not here to fight," he said simply. "I'm here to talk about my work. But if that work, and my past, makes people think, then maybe that's exactly what comedy was meant to do." The audience finally erupted in applause. Even Whoopi couldn't hide her admiration for how he handled the moment. Eddie Murphy hadn't just defended his legacy. He'd reminded everyone that real comedy, like real art, doesn't apologize for telling the truth. "I wasn't ambushing you," Joy Behar insisted, her defensive tone betraying the very accusation she was trying to deny. "I was asking legitimate questions about accountability and entertainment." "Legitimate questions," Eddie Murphy repeated, his voice rising as his legendary composure finally began to crack under the weight of her relentless prodding. "You came into this interview with a predetermined agenda to make me look bad, and now you're trying to gaslight me into believing this is some noble pursuit of truth." The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah Haynes, clearly desperate to keep the show from spiraling into chaos, jumped in. "I think what we're all trying to explore," she said gently, "is how artists can grow and evolve while still honoring their past work." Eddie nodded in her direction, his tone softening slightly. "Thank you, Sarah. That's exactly what real growth looks like. It's not about erasing the past or pretending it never happened. It's about learning from experience and continuing to create from a place of authenticity." But Joy wasn't done. She leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Authenticity doesn't excuse harm, Eddie. Words have consequences, and public figures need to acknowledge when their words have caused pain." Eddie exhaled slowly, shaking his head in disbelief. "And there it is," he said, his voice edged with frustration. "The assumption that comedy, by its very nature, is meant to cause harm. Do you even understand what comedy actually is, Joy? Do you understand its purpose in society?" "I understand that comedy can be used to marginalize people and reinforce harmful stereotypes," Joy replied, clearly confident she was standing on moral high ground. "Comedy," Eddie countered, "can also challenge power structures. It can speak truth to authority. It helps people process pain and chaos through laughter. But I guess that doesn't fit your narrative, does it?" The audience sat frozen, hanging on every word. The other co-hosts exchanged anxious glances, their smiles long gone. The atmosphere that had once been bright and conversational had devolved into something raw and uncomfortable. Whoopi Goldberg, who had remained mostly silent as the tension built, finally decided to step in. Her tone carried the unmistakable weight of authority. "Listen, both of you," she said firmly. "We're all adults here. We can disagree without tearing each other apart." "Whoop's right," Sarah added quickly, hoping to restore balance. "There's room for different perspectives." But Joy couldn't resist taking one last jab. "I just think that when you have a platform as big as yours, Eddie, you have a responsibility to use it thoughtfully." That was the moment something in Eddie snapped. He leaned forward, his voice low but brimming with restrained anger. "A responsibility to who, Joy? To you? To whatever committee decides what's acceptable this week? Or to the millions of fans who've supported me for 40 years? "To society," Joy replied proudly, completely unaware of how condescending she sounded. Eddie's eyebrows lifted. "Society?" His voice was incredulous now, disbelief laced with fury. "You think you speak for society? You think your personal opinion about what's appropriate represents hundreds of millions of people?" "I think I speak for people who believe in basic human decency," Joy declared, doubling down on her moral stance. "Basic human decency," Eddie repeated, louder this time, each word striking with precision. "Is it basic human decency to ambush a guest on your show? To attack someone's life's work without context or nuance? To demand apologies for art created decades ago, in a completely different cultural world?" Joy's face turned crimson. Her voice shook now, a mix of anger and embarrassment. "I don't have to sit here and be lectured by someone who built their career on offensive material." "And I don't have to sit here," Eddie shot back instantly, and be attacked by someone who invited me here under false pretenses." The audience gasped. Whoopi raised a hand, trying to intervene once more, but it was too late. The moment had already crossed the point of no return. Eddie continued, his voice calmer now but razor sharp. "You can't rewrite history to fit your comfort zone, Joy. Comedy, art, storytelling, they evolve. We grow, but pretending the past didn't happen doesn't make anyone better. It just erases the truth." Joy shook her head, but her earlier confidence had vanished. "You're twisting my words," she said weakly. "No," Eddie replied. "I'm putting them in perspective. You came here to talk about accountability, but what you really want is control. Control over what people say, what they laugh at, what they create. That's not progress. That's censorship disguised as virtue." For a moment, no one spoke. Even the live audience seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Whoopi broke the silence. "Okay," she said quietly. "Let's all take a moment." But the moment had already spoken for itself. Eddie Murphy had come on The View to promote his work, and instead ended up giving a masterclass in conviction, authenticity, and the power of standing his ground. When he finally stood to leave, the crowd erupted in applause. It wasn't just for the celebrity on stage. It was for the man who refused to let his truth be rewritten. The air inside the studio was thick with hostility. Eddie's voice, steady but edged with fury, sliced through the silence. "Did you think I was just going to sit quietly while you tried to tear down everything I've worked for? Did you think I was going to smile and nod while you reduced my entire career to your personal grievances?" The tension was palpable. Cameras rolled, but no one moved. The other hosts looked panicked, unsure whether to intervene or let the clash burn itself out. The audience, usually quick to laugh or clap on cue, sat frozen in stunned disbelief. No one had ever seen a daytime interview unravel like this. Joy, realizing the power had shifted, tried to recover her footing. "This is exactly the kind of aggressive behavior I was talking about," she said, voice trembling but still reaching for moral authority. Eddie let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Aggressive behavior? Joy, you've spent the last 10 minutes attacking me, my work, my integrity, and now I'm the aggressor for defending myself? That's unbelievable." Whoopi stepped in, trying once again to calm the storm. "Okay, everyone, let's take a breath," she said, her tone calm but firm. "We're supposed to be having a conversation about important issues, not tearing each other apart." But Eddie had reached his limit. The effort to stay diplomatic was gone. He had endured the ambush long enough, and now his patience had snapped. He leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on Joy's, his voice lower and far more dangerous. "You know what, Joy? I've been in this business for over 40 years. I've dealt with critics, I've faced controversy, I've been the punchline of jokes, and I can handle all of that. But I have never, ever been invited onto a show just to be ambushed with this kind of self-righteous garbage." Joy shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing she might have gone too far. "Eddie, I think you're overreacting to some simple questions," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Simple questions?" Eddie's voice exploded, echoing through the studio. Several people visibly flinched. "You call this an interview? You call attacking my entire life's work simple questions? You call demanding I apologize for making people laugh simple questions? Lady, you wouldn't know a simple question if it walked up and introduced itself." Behind the cameras, producers were frantically gesturing, trying to signal for a commercial break, but the confrontation was spiraling too quickly to stop. "I was just trying to have a meaningful conversation about accountability," Joy said weakly, her earlier confidence dissolving under Eddie's glare. Eddie laughed, a hard, bitter sound devoid of humor. "Meaningful conversation? Joy, you wouldn't recognize one if it came with subtitles. What you were trying to do was score cheap political points by attacking someone you thought would sit there and take it." Whoopi rose to her feet, stepping in again. "Eddie, maybe we should all calm down for a minute." "No, Whoopi," Eddie cut her off, his tone commanding but not cruel. "I'm done calming down. I'm tired of pretending this kind of behavior is okay. I'm tired of watching people like Joy turn every discussion into a lecture about morality instead of actually engaging with ideas." He turned back to Joy, whose face had drained of color. "You want to talk about harm, Joy? Fine, let's talk about harm. You've taken what could have been a meaningful conversation about creativity, and turned it into a toxic spectacle. You've used your platform not to ask questions, but to shame and scold. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but stopped, realizing there was nothing left to say that wouldn't make it worse. Eddie's voice softened slightly, but the words carried the full weight of his frustration. I came here to talk about my work, my journey, how comedy has evolved. But instead you've tried to box me into some narrative that fits your worldview. You want to talk about accountability? Try looking in the mirror. You're the one turning dialogue into division. The studio was silent again. No movement, no applause. Just the heavy awareness that something extraordinary had just happened. Eddie exhaled slowly, the anger fading into exhaustion. You can't build understanding by attacking people, he said finally. You can't demand progress while refusing to let people speak. That's not how art grows. That's not how society grows. Whoopi nodded quietly, her expression a mix of admiration and concern. The crew, sensing an opportunity, finally cut to commercial. As the lights dimmed and the applause sign faded, Joy sat motionless, her face a mask of forced composure. Eddie leaned back in his chair, calm once more, his presence commanding even in silence. For the audience watching at home, it was more than a viral moment. It was a reckoning. A collision between performance and principle, ego and authenticity. Eddie Murphy had not just defended himself. He had reminded everyone why true artists and true conversations can't be scripted. Eddie leaned forward, his expression a mix of disbelief and restrained fury. You've just demonstrated to millions of viewers that genuine dialogue is impossible when one person comes in with a predetermined agenda to destroy the other. I never tried to destroy you, Joy protested. But her voice trembled, stripped of conviction. Really? Eddie shot back, his words dripping with sarcasm. Then what exactly would you call what just happened here? 15 minutes of attacking my character, my career, my integrity? Demanding apologies for comedy that brought joy to millions? If that's not an attempt to destroy someone, then please, tell me what your definition of a friendly conversation looks like. The studio fell silent. The tension was so thick it seemed to hum in the air. Sarah Haynes, sensing the disaster unfolding before her eyes, jumped in, her tone pleading. I think there might be some miscommunication happening here. Eddie turned to her, his voice softening slightly. No miscommunication, Sarah. This wasn't confusion, it was deliberate. Joy came here with a plan, with a script designed to provoke. The only thing she miscalculated was assuming I'd sit here and take it. His eyes flicked back to Joy, sharp as a blade. Joy crossed her arms, her composure faltering. I think you're being paranoid, Eddie. Not everything is some conspiracy against you. That one word, paranoid, ignited something deep within him. Eddie's eyes widened, his calm exterior cracking as decades of patience finally snapped. Paranoid? His voice rose, filling the entire studio. Paranoid, Joy? You've spent 20 minutes systematically attacking everything I've built, and you want to call me paranoid for noticing. You think gaslighting me is going to work? You think I'm going to question my own reality just because you say so? The audience sat frozen, captivated by the storm unfolding before them. This wasn't a celebrity meltdown. It was something far more raw and human. A man defending his life's work against someone who underestimated his strength. This, Eddie continued, his voice thunderous, is exactly the problem with people like you. You think you can say whatever you want, attack whoever you want, and when someone responds with the anger you provoked, you dismiss them as paranoid or overreacting. You throw stones and then hide behind the word accountability. Well, that game doesn't work on me. Joy said nothing. Her usual smirk was gone, replaced by a stunned stillness. It was clear she hadn't expected this kind of fire in return. Eddie's voice steadied but lost none of its power. You had a chance today, Joy. A real opportunity. You could have had an honest, meaningful conversation with someone who's spent 40 years mastering an art form that brings people together through laughter. We could have talked about creativity, growth, and how comedy has evolved with society. But instead, you turned it into a political ambush, because you don't know how to talk about ideas without attacking people. The words hit like hammer blows, precise and unrelenting. Every syllable carried the weight of truth and regret for what the interview could have been. He paused, staring directly into the camera. And that, Joy, more than any joke I've ever told, is what's truly offensive. For several long seconds, no one moved. The studio seemed suspended in time, every face reflecting shock and awe. Even the audience, so often cued to laugh or applaud, sat in reverent silence. Whoopi finally cleared her throat, her voice uneasy. "Well, this has certainly been an intense conversation," she said, trying to breathe some normalcy back into the chaos. Eddie turned to her, his expression softening but his disappointment still evident. "It didn't have to be, Whoopi," he said quietly. "It really didn't have to be." He stood up slowly, his presence commanding the room even in silence. Without another word, he walked off the set, leaving behind a trail of stunned faces and a studio that suddenly felt smaller. Joy sat frozen in her chair, her usual bravado replaced by a hollow stillness. The camera stayed on her for a few seconds longer, capturing the uncomfortable truth written across her expression. She had tried to control the narrative and ended up losing it completely. The crew scrambled to cut to commercial, the audience murmuring in disbelief, but the damage and the lesson had already been done. In that moment, Eddie Murphy hadn't just defended himself. He'd exposed the emptiness of performative outrage. He had reminded millions watching at home that real conversation requires respect, not prepackaged judgment. When the broadcast ended, clips of the confrontation would dominate social media, dissected and debated by pundits and fans alike. But no amount of spin could change what everyone had seen with their own eyes. An artist reclaiming his dignity, live on air. And somewhere, as the lights dimmed and the applause sign flickered uncertainly, Joy Behar realized that in trying to shame a legend, she had only succeeded in revealing her own arrogance.